curious about how communicators can connect with their audiences in this day and age when there are just so many distractions and so many different ways people get their knowledge. I'm Jeff Grabmeier. I'm the retired Senior Director of Research Communications at The Ohio State University. And now that I'm retired, focusing on relaxing a little bit and maybe doing some freelance writing.
Yeah, I also notice now that there's a lot of fake information that it's very difficult sometimes to be sure if it's real or AI generated fake news kind of. And so, while it used to be easy to understand what was fake, now it can be very difficult. And so the sources of the news are really important. That is something that I think is kind of maybe relevant to you. And as being, from an institution, that's a really good place to get information from. How does that affect whole communications of university communications?
That's absolutely right. And, it concerns me as people aren't going to these particular sources that are the most authoritative. They go to TikTok or YouTube or whatever, and it's whatever the algorithm feeds them. And it seems like a lot of times they're not even concerned about where it comes from necessarily. And that is very concerning. And what we need to do is find ways to make sure that people know where your information is coming from, that you're delivering this from a university or from a institution that has some credibility.
We've known you for a long time in your work and that you have distributed amazing articles and, led a team of people at Ohio State University that put out such great science and knowledge-based articles, basically. Also, I had the pleasure of interviewing people and researchers from Ohio State University that only had the best things to say about you and how helpful you were to them and really recognizing you. And so I'd like to hear more about your role there at Ohio State University and kind of how you started off and how things changed throughout the years.
When I was hired at Ohio State, I came from a newspaper that was going out of business and the higher education reporter. I wasn't a science writer at that point, although I did write some science about the university at that point. But when I was hired, it was a relatively, new role. They wanted me to cover social sciences, which was not done, at universities at that time. And it was kind of a new role that my boss and mentor, Earl Holland, came up with. I covered psychology and political science and sociology. And that's what I did for many years. After he retired, I took over as the director of research communications, and I've had the privilege and the opportunity to edit some fine science writers to cover the whole gamut of research here at Ohio State, from engineering to medicine to agriculture and everything in between.
What do you think about science communications and how it will be progressing in the next years?
Crystal ball is always a little cloudy, especially now with things changing so quickly. But of course, you can't talk about anything these days without talking about artificial intelligence. And You know, I have no doubt that artificial intelligence is going to be a big part of what happens in the next 10 years or so. Although I don't think that it's going to be in the way that, many people think of it. I know that a lot of people use artificial intelligence to actually write things. I mean, you can put in scholarly article, journal article into AI and say, please write a popular science article about this, and it will spit something out for you. And I've certainly found that recently it's somewhat decent. It may seem acceptable, but I really don't think that's going to be the way that really changes the role of public communicators, because at the end of the day, so much of produced from AI just has a certain sameness to it that at some point it just becomes boring and you don't get any real insights. And it's pretty obvious why, because, there are databases of things that already been written. There's nothing new there. And so I think that the people that succeed in my jobs are not going to rely on AI for writing.
From what I see, and I'm curious about what you think about this, is that there are some offices that produce kind of maybe not as interesting articles. For them, AI can replace or can maintain the same level of writing that they're already doing. But the really good articles that get those viral hits, and you have had many of those in the history that I remember. I mean, there are ones that are hundreds of thousands of views are not going to be probably the result of AI writing.
I agree 100%. One of the things I did just recently, I found somebody who I think was on LinkedIn who talked about how there are these websites where you can put in a story and it will tell you like what percent chance that this is AI writing. I thought, I'm going to test out a few of my articles and see. And I was very happy to find that, the ones that I tested anyway said 0% chance of being written by AI. I mean, and it's true. I don't use AI for writing. We have a researcher here who I interviewed recently, Angus Fletcher, and he talks about in his research, and I know you've interviewed him, and he talks about his research is that AI is great for logic, but, on it for imagination or common sense insights, you're not going to get that. It's just not built for that. And that's where you really need the human touch. And that's really the ones who succeed on the higher level are going to be ones who realize that and continue to have their best writers write stuff rather than AI.
Do you think leadership at institutions and universities realize this? Do you think that they will be also aligned with the need for having good writers?
I think so. I may be, a little bit too optimistic. I do think so. The researchers who know and can help explain and can let administrations know that AI has its limitations. It's not going to replace writers. And so I think the future is still open for real writers and for institutions like universities and those that really care about getting the truth and the reality out about science.
Science writers in the US, staff writers, I am estimating them to be around maybe 300 at major media outlets. Do you think that that's approximately on point?
I don't know the actual numbers, but I can guarantee you that the numbers are way, way down from the peak, and there are fewer and fewer writers to send our stories to. And that's why one reason why a university communicator, we can't rely on the media to get our stories out. We have to help audiences find us on their own. And, we post things on places like Newswise and our own websites and stuff. And we work on ways to make sure that people find us there.
I mean, the institutional science writers will also decrease.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that universities and other institutions know that with the decline in the media, they have more responsibility than ever of helping people understand what they have, what they're doing there, and making sure that they know that, hey, our university, our institution, we're producing some great science, and we want you to know about this. So I'm pretty confident that institutions will want to continue to make sure that people know that.
What would you recommend to university presidents to keep in mind related to science communications and to promote the research of what's happening at their institution?
To support and trust their communications team, especially their science communications team, because, the presidents have nearly impossible these days. They have so much to worry about, and they need a experienced communications team that will, let people know the successes of the university.
How can the people in the Office of Science Communications get more assistance and more attention to what they're doing or budgets, for example?
They really have to kind of expand, if necessary, what they do. The basic thing that science communications offices at university have done is promote individual studies, which is still important. But I think nowadays we need to expand that and show more impact stories. Not only that you did this study that was published in Science or Nature or whatever, but here's how this research that's been done here has impacted communities in your state. Ohio State, for example, we have a program now called For Ohioans where we talk about stories that impacted individual communities here in Ohio and how the research has helped their lives in various ways. And there can be, we can do videos and stuff and stories and send them out various ways. And, that's why one reason I appreciated Newswise, Newswise allows us to do stories that are more feature stories and post them. And that really kind of increases the audience of those that paying attention to science here and also exposes them to the process of science and the impact of science beyond, here's an individual science result that you might be interested in.
What do you think about ways and means to better communicate basic science?
First of all, I do think it's important to do, and we do a fair number of stories about basic science because, I mean, that's the job of the university. I mean, we recognize that, and our website is kind of the publication of record in a sense of what goes on at the university, and some of it, even if it's not going to become viral, even if it's not going to create a whole lot of coverage, we think it's important to write about. Like years ago, somebody had won a Nobel Prize, and I honestly don't remember who it was. And when the reporters I remember seeing later that we're scrambling to find what's been written about this researcher, the only place that had written about that was their university. So I always tell my colleagues or told my colleagues that, hey, we got to do this in case this guy ever wins the Nobel Prize.
Making their science writer at their institution their best friend would be the best thing that they could do in their life.
Mhm. Exactly.
You had mentioned that it's fascinating how there are things, and it's important to write and share research about things that might not seem to be very unique in some way, because I see them also every day, like, exercise is good to decrease, cancer. I mean, it seems obvious, right?
Right, right.
But you think and you believe that or you've seen that that's also important and that people are interested in it. Can you tell me more about that?
I was, you know, asked to write about social science research as real science for Ohio State, which something that had universities didn't do very often. And so one of the things I wanted to investigate was like, what kind of stories will be successful. And, most people think about you would call man bites dog stories, something that goes against what you expect. And that's what you think will succeed. That's what journalists are trained to believe would be of interest. But, a lot of social science research is confirming what people already believe, but it has never been proven. And until it's been scientifically proven, you don't really know if something is true. And so I did releases like that and found that they were very successful. And, at one point I got contacted by a reporter for the magazine called The Scientist, which is a magazine for, as you might expect, scientists. But they were very interested that I, had all these releases like that seemed to have very obvious conclusions. I think the article headline was Selling the Self-Evident.
What would be 3 things that a PIO could do to help train a faculty member that is about to have an interview with the media?
You just can't use the words you use with a scientist when you're communicating with the public. The second one, and I think this might even be the biggest key, is don't assume knowledge. It's so easy, even as a science writer, but especially for a scientist, a part of your field, you just get to learn things that after a while become, you part of your reality. It becomes easy to think that everybody knows this. And so when you're communicating with the public, you gotta always be thinking about, am I about to say something that people actually know? Maybe you don't have to dumb it down that much, but you have to remember that your level of knowledge is certainly a lot different than other people's. And you really have to struggle. And it is a struggle, I think, at times to explain it on that level. Well, I think the third thing is to find a way to connect with a non scientist. And, for some kinds of science, you can say, this could have a practical application in the future. If this happens and this happens, this can be a starting point for something that can help you in your life. But, there's some of it, it doesn't have to be that. It can be like, connect with your audience because this is just really cool. This is awe inspiring. Look at what I found that's never been known before. Or, this is just a totally new area of science that hasn't been explored before. That can be just as important and can connect with an audience just as much as saying this is news you can use, for instance. But yeah, those would be what I would really try to impress upon researchers.
What would be the most important lesson that you would want to share with someone that's starting today in an institutional communications role?
Everything is changing so fast that I think it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day stuff that you have to do and miss some of the big trends, miss some of the things that are changing. And again, I don't know for sure, but as I said, artificial intelligence is going to be a big deal. And you have to really kind of pay attention what your colleagues at other universities are doing. You have to be cognizant of what people in the media are doing to tell their stories and how it's changing, and be willing to change yourself, to always realize that what you're doing today may have to change tomorrow to meet your goals.
Do you think that it is important, though, for people in media relations now to maintain and try to spend a lot of time developing personal relationships with the media, or spend that time in finding the articles and then just letting reporters maybe come to them?
When you can, they're helpful. It's always good to have personal relationships, but I honestly think that with the turnover in the media and everything, that it's not as important as it used to be. It's harder to do and less effective because people cycle in and out so quickly. There are fewer of them there. What's more important is to focus on putting out good content, good stories, good videos out there as possible and finding where they hit. And, you know, oftentimes they hit places you wouldn't expect. And it's not the people that use them, it's someone new, yeah, every time.
What have I not asked you?
One of the things that concerns me is, how research has shown that public trust in higher education has declined significantly in recent decades. And it's declined over the past decade, dropping from 57% confidence rate in higher education in 2015 to a low of 36% in 2024. And there was a little bit of a rebound in 2025 with increasing to 42%. To me, that shows again, the importance of higher education supporting their communications teams to show the public how they're being served by higher education. And then also, to me, shows the importance of providing these impact stories that show the people who may have lost some confidence that, here's how university research has impacted you in a positive way. It has helped your community. And, it just shows the importance of those kind of stories to really hopefully reboost public confidence in higher education.
Definitely, the communications offices should be brought in to help address that issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I mean, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.